Hello and welcome to Analytics Nexus 2019, the premier virtual event for analytics best practice. This presentation is titled Standardizing Google Analytics Implementation to Support Multi-Brand or Multi-Site Businesses, and will be presented by Meredith Walter. This is just one webinar in a whole series of presentations you have access to beginning today. A few quick housekeeping items before I introduce this presentation. At any time, you can interact with this presenter or the other presenters with questions or comments on Slack. The Slack address for Analytics Nexus is analyticsnexus.slack.com, and you should have received an email invitation to join if you registered in advance. If you didn't receive that email, you can find an invitation link to the Slack workspace in the menu below. Once you log in to the Analytics Nexus Slack, you can find the channel for Meredith Walter to engage. Also, you can engage with us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @analytics_nexus. And if you have questions about Analytics Nexus or Claravine, who's producing this event, feel free to email us at info@claravine.com. The presenter for this session is Meredith Walter. Meredith is an emerging marketing analytics professional with 6 years of experience in the digital marketing space after graduating from Towson University's College of Business and Economics. She recently joined Stanley Black & Decker's Insights team as a web analyst to propel the business forward with marketing analytics insights. Equipped with a Nielsen Norman UX certification, Google Analytics certification, and a vast range of experience, Meredith is a seasoned digital analyst who transforms data into compelling stories that drive positive change. Meredith, over to you.
Thanks so much for joining me for my presentation today. I am so excited to share some of my analytics knowledge and experience with you all. It is my hope that you'll have at least one thing from this presentation that you can go and implement right away, if not more. I've included links to the takeaways and spreadsheets that I referenced in this presentation that you can access in the resources widget. They're Google Sheets, so all you have to do is go to the File menu and then click to make a copy. Once you make a copy, you can personalize, tweak, and make it completely your own. So during my time both on the agency side and now in-house at Stanley Black & Decker, I had to create a process for my analytics implementation and maintenance not only for myself, but also for when new team members or clients were brought on board. I needed an easy way to determine and show where our analytics implementation currently stands, what needs to be done, and so on. Not to mention, at Stanley Black & Decker, I am singularly managing 12 brands with one or more websites to each of those brands. So this is the three-part process that I found most effective to keep me sane. The first step is auditing. It is so important to be able to pulse check where your analytics configuration stands. There are 3 different scenarios that I'm sure most of you are in. 1, you could be either just starting implementation from scratch. 2, you could have inherited someone else's analytics configurations, which is where I was when I started Stanley Black & Decker. Or 3, you might have created your own analytics implementation as it stands now, which is probably the best place to be in my opinion. If you're in number 1, where you're starting from scratch, it can be pretty overwhelming to understand where to start and what is important. If you're in number 2, where you've inherited somebody's analytics configurations, it can be extremely difficult to figure out what means what, not to mention time-consuming to wrap your head around what someone else did. If you're in the 3rd scenario where you created your own, which is great, but it also can be pretty difficult to remember what you did maybe on one site versus another, or if you're like Stanley Black & Decker and you have multiple brands, maybe you can't remember what you did for one brand versus another, or maybe you acquired one, and so on. Auditing will ease the frustrations in all 3 scenarios for you. One of the links that I provided is to a Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager implementation spreadsheet, which is a great tool for those beginning to implement Google Analytics or even for those looking to add advanced tracking on their Google Analytics. This spreadsheet, once it's filled out, will answer the questions of things like, what do we want to track on the site, or where do we stand on our implementation? If you don't have Google Tag Manager, I highly recommend it. There could be a presentation alone on just Google Tag Manager, but long story short, if you don't have Google Tag Manager or don't know what it is, it's extremely helpful because it can take IT out of the picture for whenever you need your marketing pixels placed. So it actually puts all of that power back into the marketer's hands so that they can tag their website when they need to. You don't have to wait on IT's timelines and all of that fun stuff that I'm sure everybody has run into. And just because we don't have enough time to go over Google Tag Manager completely, I've included 2 links to some of my favorite Google Tag Manager resources. The first one is why to use Google Tag Manager, so it's just a nice overview. And the second one is a YouTube series called Measure School, which is how I learned pretty much to do Google Tag Manager, and it's an awesome set of videos that you can learn how to implement additional tracking on your site for yourself. The picture on this slide is a screenshot of the implementation spreadsheet that we'll take a brief look at. So this spreadsheet is extremely handy for either helping you keep track of implementing your events or goal tracking, or even to hand off to someone to implement the tracking for you. So I've used it for interns or entry-level positions to help out with implementation. They found it really easy to follow along with, and you can even include links to videos on how to implement the tracking that you're looking for. So a lot of times I will include links to those Measure School videos that I mentioned previously that an intern or entry-level person who might not be as familiar with Google Tag Manager, they can actually follow along step by step with those videos, which has been great. It's also great documentation to have on hand after the implementation is done to better understand the contents of your Google Tag Manager container as well. The Google Analytics portion is to help track configurations. So you can get a better idea of what needs to be done in your Google Analytics configuration from the spreadsheet that we'll talk about next. And if you have multiple brands or multiple websites, you can just duplicate this first tab onto multiple tabs and spread it out based off of your website. So each website or brand, if you're structured that way, can have its own tab of its own Google Analytics implementation. Another takeaway that you'll get within the Resources widget is the Audit and Configuration spreadsheet. This spreadsheet will answer the questions like, where does our analytics configuration stand, what are we keeping tabs on, and how is that tracked? Once you make a copy of the audit, it'll look similar to the picture on the screen right now. You can add in your brands or websites in the rows and then mark off what is done for each site and brand already as you go across the columns. So this is a great way to take a pulse check on where things are in your analytics right at this moment. Each column also has a tooltip, so whenever you hover over it, it'll help explain what they mean. That way you can kind of get clarity there. You can also rearrange the columns in priority order from left to right for your business. I already put them in what I think is a good priority order if you're not sure. Once filled out, this is a perfect snapshot of where everything currently stands and where your efforts need to be focused. So as you work from left to right, you want more of your spreadsheet to be white on the left-hand side than the right-hand side. Feel free to add in additional columns that might be unique to you and your business as well. At one point at Stanley Black & Decker, we had to do additional configurations for personally identifiable information in our URLs. So that was a column that I added in. But if you have any kind of unique situations like that, definitely add in a column for those. Now that you have a good idea of where to begin your configurations, you can document them along the way. So the goal of documenting thoroughly is so that when either you get a new website or a new brand, you know exactly how to configure the analytics so that it's up to speed with the rest of your sites. It's also extremely helpful to have this documentation for when a new team member joins your team, or from the client side, even when a new client joins your team. That way they know exactly how to configure a new site or setup. to the Audit and Configuration Spreadsheet, you'll review each column and perform the necessary changes. And like I said before, tooltips are included in each column for added understanding of what needs to be done. And I'll also be available on the Slack channel if you have any questions, so totally available to help. Each column could have a separate presentation on the importance of it, but I'm going to review a few just briefly. Included on the second tab of the audit spreadsheet is a standard filters list. These are filters that I personally like to use, but whether or not you use them for your configuration is totally up to you. Included on here are filters for spam traffic and consistent reporting. So things like including valid host names so that ghost referrals don't show up in your data, or lowercasing all of your URLs since Google Analytics is case sensitive. Overall, applying filters to your Google Analytics views will result in cleaner data and ultimately more accurate reporting. This spreadsheet, once it's filled out, should turn into a reference for you in case you get a new website. Then you'll know exactly which filters to apply. Once your sites have all of the standard filters applied, you can check it off in the audit. Another spreadsheet you'll see from this presentation is a UTM Generator Spreadsheet. For those of you that don't know, UTMs are tags that are added onto a link to your website to track how visitors clicked and got to your website. You might have seen them before. They're kind of like these weird parameters that get added on to a URL, and that is simply just tracking for Google Analytics, so it can decipher if you came to a website from an email or a social post, and it even gets down to the nitty-gritty of which specific social post. This spreadsheet is actually a tool that we used internally at Stanley Black & Decker. I developed it by tweaking from other ones that I found on the internet and making them a little more governed so that the data governance is there that is needed. However, to be completely honest with you, we have a ton of hands and eyes using these spreadsheets for multiple brands with various agencies that we actually needed a more robust tool with better data governance, which is why we began working with Claravine. So if that sounds like an organization where you have a ton of people creating UTMs, you have different agencies working on different sites or maybe different brands, you'll more than likely want to look into a tool like Claravine. However, this spreadsheet is a really good starting point for those needing a better system. So even if you need to figure out what robust tools that you need, this spreadsheet is an awesome way to figure out what it is that you need. An entire presentation can be made around UTMs, but with limited time, I've included one of my favorite resources for UTM best practices, so make sure you check that out and you can implement some of those into your own brands and websites. So what's pictured on this slide is probably my most referenced document in my day-to-day job. This document gives a big picture view at event names on a site. So this could be particularly helpful for those that inherited someone else's analytics configuration. At Stanley Black & Decker, all of our sites have the same type of interactions that we track, such as our Where to Buy button. However, because of personnel turnover or brand acquisitions or what have you, none of the tracking and the naming conventions are the same across all sites. So if I needed to draw a report on Where to Buy clicks for one brand and then also do it for another brand, the naming conventions that I'm looking at aren't the same, so I constantly need a reference to go back and look at to say, okay, what is this brand's category, action, and label for a Where to Buy click? It's super helpful. So if you have anything like that similar in your company, I highly recommend having this. I actually printed it out and I have it posted up by my desk that I look at all the time. Feel free to change the header colors to match your own brands and websites so that it's kind of like a visual reference that you can just easily look at and pick up on. So finally, we get to our maintain stage. At this point, you've gotten your site's analytics all to the same level and documented. Now it's time to actually maintain the configurations. Maintenance will actually answer these questions. So things like, how do we stay on top of this? Or how can we figure out if something is broken? Google Analytics custom alerts will be your best friend moving forward if they're not already. So Google Analytics custom alerts do a lot of the monitoring work for you and can help tremendously when your spreads thin across multiple sites. So these alerts can help you stay on top of broken configurations before it's too late. You set the parameters for which you want to be alerted, and if the conditions become true, Google Analytics will email you or text you, depending on what you define, so that you can keep on top of the issues before they become destructive. So things like if your tracking gets stripped off of your site on a recent redesign or a recent website push, your custom alert will pick it up as soon as it happens and alert you right away. That way it doesn't go days or weeks or hopefully not months before you actually realize that your tracking has dropped off. And keep in mind that alerts don't always have to be negative. So you might want to put an alert on your site for a spike in traffic from, let's say, referral sources to stay on top of you received like a PR hit. So if you get a lot of traffic from one specific referral source, you might have been mentioned in the news and you want to stay on top of that to see why traffic's coming to your site. Or you can even put it on for an increase in conversions in your site and you want to stay on top of, hey, something's going on, why is everybody coming to our site? So on the audit spreadsheet, you'll find a tab for standard Google Analytics alerts. I've included a few that I have on my sites to help keep tabs of any issues with the sites. You can add or remove any that you see for your business. Ones might fit better than others, or there might be ones that you want to create that aren't included on here. Whatever is best for you, feel free to personalize this. All that matters is that you're documenting it and keeping it standardized. And last but not least, it's important to know that this process is cyclical. So either every 6 or 12 months, depending on the nature of your website, maybe how often it changes or how often you're pushing updates or what have you, you should go back through and check your audit and update your documentation and then improve your maintenance. So maybe you want to figure out better alerts, or maybe you want to tweak your alerts a little bit. Whatever it is, make sure you go back through every once in a while. You'll even want to update your documentation as you go. So if you found after you've implemented your filters in a couple weeks, you say, hey, I really want to add this filter, and you do it, just make sure you add it back to your documentation as well as adding it to each one of your websites. That way you have the solid baseline that you created in your audit to begin with. I promise your future self will thank you for your documentation and keeping everything consistent. If you're looking for additional resources for any kind of web analytics help, my first recommendation is Web Analytics 2.0 by Avinash, who also has a blog, which is extremely applicable for anybody in web analytics. I totally recommend subscribing to it. I also included an Amazon link if you are interested in purchasing. Another one of my favorite resources for analytics is Successful Analytics by Brian Clifton. So this book is awesome for anybody who is a manager of web analytics or maybe somebody who just wants to understand the insights of analytics a little bit better. It's a pretty short read. It's a thin book, but I reference it all the time. It has tons of really resourceful information in there. So I included the link on Amazon if you're interested, and I hope you find it helpful. So thank you so much for sitting in on my presentation. I hope that I met my goal of you having at least one thing that you can take away and implement right away. If you have any questions on the spreadsheets, run into any trouble, or want to bounce ideas back and forth, I am totally available. You can shoot me a message on the Slack channel or what have you. And other than that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your presentations.
Thank you, Meredith, for this material. This has been incredibly insightful. Just a quick reminder to our guests, you can engage with Meredith Walter with questions or comments at her dedicated Slack channel. And thank you again, and enjoy the remaining presentations.